Hello and welcome to the National Road Safety Partnership Program webinar, Safely Delivering the Growing Urban Freight Task, Learning from International Best Practice. This is our first webinar for 2020 and it's from our new home at Monash University Accident Research Centre. We'll be there very soon, we're just going through the process. And for those of you who are part of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport and you're online, you'll be receiving 5 CPD points for today's webinar. So it's great to have their support and promoting this webinar. So thank you very much. My name is Jerome Carslake and I am the Principal Professional Leader of the NRSPP and its many activities. To find out more about the program, please register, go to our website, check out the newsletter, or even better follow us on our social media, in particular our LinkedIn page. We try to be as interactive as possible. Today's session, we'll be going for around approximately 60 minutes. We're planning to have plenty of time throughout for discussion. We've got 4 key hold points, and we may take a few questions on the way in between. I know Michael's got a lot to share today. We're going to be recording our session, and it'll be shared on the NRSPP website, along with the PowerPoint afterwards. We're using Zoom. This is a new learning session for us as well, and for all of our future webinars. So it's a learning experience. Thank you for joining us on today's maiden journey. So, we want to make this as interactive as possible. Well, if you can just go back one page, please, Michael. And if you can send through your questions, you can click on that if you haven't discovered the questions box. That's a picture of Michael and I from our test run when we're going through this. Click down the bottom there, it'll come on up and you can enter your questions in there and we'll still be fielding them. As I mentioned, there's a few hold points as we'll be going along. And please make them as interactive as possible. Let's try and delve into it and see what thoughts you'd love to know. So I mentioned our presenter a couple of times, Michael. Hi, Michael.
G'day, Jerome. Thanks for having me here.
Excellent to have you on board and to share your wisdom. A bit of a background of Michael. So Michael was a passionate safety professional dedicated to ensuring the safety of the construction transport task involved in building Australia's largest public transport infrastructure project, the Sydney Metro. In 2018, Michael was awarded the NRMA ACT Road Safety Trust Churchill Fellowship to investigate best practice to improve heavy vehicle safety in urban environments. Michael works with a range of industry and government stakeholders to integrate road safety into the project's planning, design and construction phase for improving road transport safety standards and continuously promoting education awareness around heavy vehicle safety. Michael's won the best paper with implication for workplace road safety at the Australasian Road Safety Conference 2019, which NRSPP kindly sponsored. And this is part of the outcome of it. We get to share the whole session instead of him trying to squeeze it into 15 minutes at the conference. And we also did it with a thought leadership paper. So really keen to draw on your insights, Michael. Over to you, mate.
Great. Thanks for that, Jerome. And thank you to the NRSPP for the opportunity to present today's webinar. I'm grateful that I get to spend a little bit more time to cover my fellowship because there's a lot of content in there, and 15 minutes is difficult to to get it all done. So just quickly, for everyone listening in, I hope you're keeping well during this unprecedented time. Certainly there'll be a lot of lessons for road safety when we come out of this pandemic. But it was around this time last year, a very different time, that I completed research as part of my Churchill Fellowship that Jerome mentioned, which was to investigate international best practice to improve heavy vehicle safety in urban environments. My report, which is available online, highlights a number of key areas we can learn from overseas experiences to address similar risks we face moving heavy vehicle freight in our urban centres. And this particular area, as Jerome mentioned, is of particular importance to me in my line of work, which involves working closely with our industry supply chain partners on the Sydney Metro infrastructure project to ensure that we're managing the risks associated with introducing hundreds of thousands of construction heavy vehicle movements in urban areas for a number of years to come to support the construction of the new Metro Rail project. And this will be highly relevant to similar infrastructure projects generating a significant freight task in our cities for years to come, and local authorities as well, looking to improve the safety of their urban heavy vehicle operations. So just a quick note on the Churchill Fellowship. Really, what this is it provides an opportunity for passionate Australian citizens to travel overseas to investigate practices and approaches internationally that can benefit Australian communities. More importantly, you don't have to be a researcher or an academic to apply for a fellowship. This is open to everyone. You simply have to be a passionate individual, a practitioner like myself, working in your field, dedicated to making a difference. I'd strongly encourage people to apply for this opportunity. Obviously, you won't be traveling in the next year or so, but now is a good time to start planning. So for today's webinar, I'd like to provide a quick overview of some of the current issues and challenges we are faced with, which influence the safety of our urban freight task in Australia. I'll then be providing a summary of the key areas which were reviewed during my fellowship, which I've included here under a number of themes or topics, which these were seen as current best practice internationally. So just quickly, just to paint the current trend in Australia, over the last decade in Australia, whilst we've seen a reduction in fatal crashes involving articulated heavy vehicles, we've seen very little change in the number of fatal crashes involving heavy rigid vehicles, where almost 1/3 of these crashes are occurring in speed zones consistent with urban areas of 60 kilometers per hour or less. Urban areas not only feature lower speed zones, but they feature more complex traffic environments in terms of road design and traffic interaction. When we take a look at the Sydney metropolitan region, where we've actually been seeing a steady increase in the number of fatal crashes involving heavy rigid vehicles over the last decade. And again, you can see the opposite trend has been seen for articulated heavy vehicles. Now, some would argue that this is due to the fact that there are more trucks on the road. Well, regardless, an increase in freight should not amount to more people losing their lives or being critically injured if the elements that make up our road transport system are inherently safe. And in fact, we are seeing more vehicles on the road today, whether they're light vehicles or heavy vehicles. And yet our overall road fatality toll, annual road fatality toll has been increasing, although not at a rate that we would like, but it still has been decreasing. And I mentioned this, the safe system. The safe system principles are that nobody should die or be seriously injured as a result of using the road transport system, and that the elements of the system must be designed and operated in such a way so that if a mistake does occur, it doesn't cost someone their life. What this means is, like any complex system, be it rail, aviation, or a nuclear power facility, we need to be building in multiple protective and preventative layers or redundancies that exist to take into account human error or the mistakes that people make on the road. Some of the current challenges influencing our urban heavy vehicle freight task at the moment do include the fact that the urban freight task is growing faster than any other road freight task in Australia. And this was highlighted in the recent inquiry into national freight and supply chain priorities. In fact, according to their report, major urban centres like Sydney face the predicament of not being able to manage their increasing freight task, even with new infrastructure. Now, this might change due to the current situation, but as we return to a level of normalcy, we will continue to see more freight on our roads. The Heavy Vehicle National Law doesn't provide for the unique differences that arise between the urban and line haul freight task. This was further highlighted in the recent NTC's HVNL review, which is still currently going. And our design rules for new vehicles continue to lag, and in some cases significantly behind UNEC regulations. This fact became more evident in my discussions with a number of representatives I'd met from manufacturers, industry operators, and transport agencies in the EU. And to compound this, it's reported that we have an aging heavy vehicle fleet, which currently has an average age of 14.9 years, 8 years, sorry, by the Truck Industry Council. And as raised in Ostro's recent review into the driver competency framework, driver training doesn't take into account a number of important safety critical knowledge areas and skills. For example, a recent review of existing accredited units of competency for heavy vehicle drivers' skill set references to areas such as new vehicle safety features, their limitations, and the knowledge and skills needed to share the road with vulnerable road users were close to non-existent. I think we have a question slide there, Jerome.
Yeah, we do. I've got a couple of questions for you, Michael.
Sure.
When you were talking about HVNL and the differences between urban and line haul, what are the differences?
Yeah, so one of the main differences, I mean, the urban freight task, I can definitely speak because I deal with it, in my day job. The urban freight task involves a lot more traffic interaction. As I mentioned before, there's greater traffic interaction and the issues of congestion can compound that. The urban freight task also arguably falls within a number of exemptions under the Heavy Vehicle National Law, such as those that relate to fatigue regulations.
Great. And I was also just wondering, When you're sitting there talking about the safe system, how complex is that applying to heavy vehicles?
How complex is that applying to heavy vehicles?
Yeah, because you just
So,
got such a big vehicle here, a mass.
yeah, so I think it's really important that we start to take this a little bit more seriously, and particularly around, which I will talk to in the slides to come, but around vehicle safety features and regulations. It is a high risk industry. I believe that the majority of fatalities in any industry do occur in the road transport sector. It's high risk and needs to be more measures need to be applied to reduce our road toll as we're seeing at the moment. There's a lot, as I'll go through in the presentation, there's a lot I'll go through with this that relate to vehicle safety features, but also, when we think of the road user, driver training and education as well for the public as well. There's a lot that can be done in this space.
Great. And this is a question here from Craig. He's put it to all the panelists. If you can use the question, that'd be even better. Safe systems highlight the deficiency in human education. And what solutions are being developed? And I know you're going to be touching on that very soon, aren't you?
Yes, I will. Yeah, definitely.
Jumping ahead.
Great. So I'll push forward and I'll probably answer some of the questions that come up.
Oh, you will.
Great. So as part of my fellowship research, I started with a really simple question: what was it that other countries were doing to improve the safety of the urban heavy vehicle freight task? We obviously have a risk here that we need to manage in our own country. How are other countries dealing with this? And that really involved a combination of a desktop literature review to start with, and then a number of interviews, observations, and site visits, ranging from meetings with research agencies, government departments, manufacturers, and industry operators, which were based in the United Kingdom, Belgium, Luxembourg, Sweden, and New York and Boston in the United States. Some happy snaps there. This won't be like a photo journal though, I promise. So what did I find? So as I mentioned at the start, the primary key areas, one of them was accreditation schemes and standards. And this was observed in quite detail in the United Kingdom. The extent to which accreditation schemes are invested in by transport operators was something that was quite phenomenal. It's worth noting that in Australia, we do have accreditation schemes as well. Two which are our main schemes, the NHVAS and Truck Safe accreditation. So just a quick note on those schemes. NHVAS is not without its shortcomings and has been under a fair bit of review in recent years. And Truck Safe, I would have to say, is the only one that provides a holistic management framework for operators to be accredited against, but unfortunately doesn't receive the same regulatory concessions as NHVAS, and therefore uptake is quite low. But the main schemes that I looked at when I was in the UK were the FORS, CLOCS, ISO 39001, and Earned Recognition schemes. For the purposes of today's webinar, I'll focus on the first three there, which are used in the transport and construction sectors, which generate the majority of the urban freight. And they're demonstrating improvements to road safety performance, and in particular in the urban road environment. So the Fleet Operator Recognition Scheme is an industry-led accreditation scheme established in the UK in 2008 to raise the level of quality within fleet operations and demonstrate that transport operators were achieving high safety, environmental, and compliance standards. What it does is encourage safer vehicles, drivers, and routes through meeting the requirements of the standard and retaining accreditation to the scheme. There are over 100,000 vehicles and 5,000 operators accredited to the scheme when I was there, and it operates on a tiered approach to accreditation. So it requires the operator to progressively work its way up to achieve gold as the ultimate goal. And there are approximately 48 requirements to gain accreditation, which are grouped under areas of the fleet operator's control. That is its management systems, vehicle safety, maintenance and efficiency, driver training, fitness for duty, and continuous professional development, and the operation, which includes route planning, journey management, and risk assessment of haulage routes. But it's within the requirements of the scheme that offer road safety benefits to communities and the urban environment, as they address road traffic safety areas in which fleet operators have control and can influence. For example, under requirement G6, fleet operators are required to review their fleet operation to further improve environmental performance, road safety, and efficiency. This review must include evaluating vehicles designed for more efficient operations, ultra low and zero emission capable vehicles, and safer vehicles that are best in class for direct vision, which I will talk about later on as well. Under requirement 01, operators must plan and adhere to compliant, safe and efficient routes. Risk assessments must be conducted as part of planning the fleet operators' routes, addressing factors such as the origin, destination, and any sensitive land use areas or community considerations along the route, such as hospitals or cycle routes, and even the impact of working time and driver's hours, vehicle dimension, weight restrictions, emission standards, the list goes on. It's been around for quite some time now and has evidence to back its effectiveness. The scheme has since demonstrated FORS accredited operators are achieving on average a 25% reduction in total collisions, a 41% reduction in injury collisions, and a 64% less likely to be involved in most serious infringement offences, and 50% less likely to be involved in driver's hours offences. The next scheme that I looked at related to the construction industry. And whilst this is not an accreditation scheme, it is an industry standard. So CLOCS is an industry standard which was developed in 2013 following a report by the Transport Research Laboratory of the UK, which found essentially that the safety culture in construction projects was essentially deprioritising road safety. And the findings from the report, I just highlighted the findings here. I just want to read them out just quickly. Two of the findings were quite damning. They actually found that road risk was viewed as less important than general health and safety risk, and that there was a lack of ownership of road risk by clients and principal contractors in the construction industry. It was quite interesting to see those findings come out, and particularly are good lessons for our local industries. So the TRL report released in 2013 led to the development of the standard, which aims to fundamentally change the way construction industry manages work-related road safety, especially in relation to vulnerable road users, such as cyclists, pedestrians, and motorcyclists, which were found to be overrepresented in the casualty data in the London area. Essentially, construction clients are to invest in safer transport, prioritising road safety, and that involves the collective efforts of those involved in a construction supply chain, including planners, clients, principal contractors, and fleet operators. And they're required to produce a construction logistics plan, which demonstrates how they will reduce truck movements and reroute or retime deliveries to reduce the impact on the road network. CLOCS requires a minimum of 4 silver accreditation, so it works with the previous scheme that I mentioned. An initial effectiveness has shown that after the City of Camden introduced CLOCS into its planning and procurement processes, it had achieved a 47% reduction in fatal and serious injuries between heavy vehicles and vulnerable road users. When I was in Birmingham on my fellowship, I attended the annual CLOCS conference. And I'll be honest, I've never seen anything like this before, particularly in the construction industry. CLOCS is certainly viewed as a best practice model to procuring and managing safer road transport in construction, and has since created a safety culture which prioritises road safety as a risk to the same level as construction safety risks. NRSPP have also done webinars in more detail on these schemes, which if you have not come across these schemes, because they have been around for some time, it'd be worthwhile listening to these as well, if you want to get more information.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah. Free plug for you, Jerome. So I'll move on. The final scheme that I will cover in this section was ISO 39001. And this is a certification scheme similar to the likes of, you may have heard of 9001 for quality management or 45001 for occupational health and safety management. But essentially 39001 was established to provide a holistic approach to managing specifically road traffic safety risks, which was to complement existing road traffic programs and regulations. And this definition is important because it's just complying with existing legal obligations or regulations doesn't necessarily guarantee that your operation is safe. And I had the opportunity to learn more about the implementation of 39001 from a fleet operator based in London called FM Conway. as you can see there. FM Conway they were the third company in Europe and 17th company in the world to be awarded certification against 39001. And they have since gained an international reputation for the work that they do in this field. FM Conway, it's funny, they don't actually consider themselves a transport business. Like a lot of businesses primarily will focus on a particular industry, and they will see road transport as an ancillary to what they do. Despite operating a huge fleet, they have a fleet of over 100 heavy vehicles and light vehicles, but they are more so considered a construction aggregates company. Their approach to road safety was quite simple, and based on the model there that you can see, right vehicle, right person, right place. This included a driver management system of license and qualification checks, health assessments, which included regular eyesight checks of their drivers, and ongoing training and continuous professional development program, all of which was supported by their organizational safety culture, which embeds road safety as a core value. In terms of the right vehicle, establishing a formal relationship with their vehicle manufacturers was seen as critical. And conducting a visibility assessment of their fleet and investing in safety features beyond regulatory requirement safety features. For example, recently investing in smart telematics systems and mobile phone blocking devices. In addition to this, the organization undertakes route planning and risk assesses hazardous locations and infrastructure along its delivery routes. The benefits of the scheme were not only seen in road traffic incidents being reduced, but also to the company's bottom line. As you can see there, they experienced a 60% reduction in their insurance claims within the first 3 months of implementation, a 10% reduction in the overall insurance premium to the company, and a 15% overall reduction in maintenance costs. I think a number of conclusions can be made just from looking at the accreditation schemes and the maturity of them in the UK. The focus of accreditation schemes really need to take into account how transport activities can influence safe system outcomes and not just meeting compliance. Schemes such as FORS and ISO 39001 serve as a good model for what road transport safety management accreditation schemes should include. And models such as CLOCs encourage greater supply chain leadership and engagement in improving road safety outcomes for the urban construction freight task.
Excellent, Michael. We've got a great couple of questions here we'll dive on in. First one from Kim. He wants to know, are European accreditation schemes applying only to the high reward operators? Because 50% of the trucks, even in Europe, are non-high reward. How safe are the other operators?
Yeah, so I don't have the data on hand, but it's a good question. It was raised with the lead for FORS that most of the smaller operators are becoming accredited to FORS. It is becoming a scheme which is increasingly being specified by a number of clients and customers. And it is a good way to reach the smaller companies that don't necessarily have the resources or processes in place to establish or even monitor and implement a safety management system. These were companies that were looking for something that would help them not only address compliance, but continuously improve their performance.
What's the difference between self-insured and insurance underwritten by those involved in CLOCs at all? Can you answer that one at all, Michael?
The difference between, self-insured
and insured underwritten.
Yeah, I didn't come across that during the review of CLOCs, unfortunately.
And I'm unaware of, Michael was just asking a question, are there any companies accredited with ISO in Australia at all?
That's a good question. In my research, I couldn't identify any companies that are accredited to ISO 39001. I think, when people traditionally look at this standard, they might be scared away when they read the requirements, but it's FM Conway are an aggregates company. And I think there was another organization as well, which was a waste company as well, which gained accreditation to 39001. So it's definitely achievable. And the system only has to be as complex as you make it to be.
Okay, great. And one last question before we move on. Were the schemes identified mandated by regulators, or are consignor type organisations requesting operators to have them as part of a pre-qualification for engagement? That's a great question.
Yeah. So the schemes are not mandated by regulators. The schemes were mandated. Clocks obviously is a construction standard which specifies fours. So construction projects particularly in London, there's a lot of them specifying clocks already. If they were local developments, if it was a local council, they would be specifying it, or a developer, they would be specifying clocks, which would mandate fours. But yeah, it's more of a consigner, a request.
One last question here before we close this part out.
Sure.
And Peter asks, what do you see as being the key actions to encourage supply chain take-up of fours, clocks, and ISO, etc.?
Yeah, so I think the key action that worked, particularly in the UK, is a procurement approach. So by specifying it in contractual arrangements, your operators that want to gain that contract will essentially look at investing in what's required to achieve accreditation. So you've got a customer here that's basically awarding a contract based on quality and safety, not just on getting the job done. They actually value and are willing to pay for operators that are accredited to these schemes, because it also fits under corporate social responsibility as well, which is in regulation in the UK too. But I think that would have been the main driver for it.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much for that, Michael.
No worries. Yeah, I'll move on. I do have quite a bit to get through in the next section. So in the next section, as you can see, I'll focus on vehicle safety standards. And I think for most of us that are listening in, it can go without saying that the EU leads the way in vehicle safety. An example that I've provided here is Volvo's collision warning with emergency brake system, or AEB, autonomous emergency braking. Most of the listeners would have heard of this system. Just important to point out, Volvo introduced this in 2012. It was made mandatory in the EU regulations in 2013 for new heavy vehicles, and as of 2015 for all model heavy vehicles, and has continuously been refined in its effectiveness since. As a comparison, it was around the same time that we had only just mandated ABS brakes for heavy vehicles in our Australian design rules. And when you take into account our aging heavy vehicle fleet, you can guarantee there are still a number of heavy vehicles on our roads which still don't provide for basic safety features designed to assist in a braking scenario. And the reason why I mention this is if we take a look again, having a look at the crash data from the Sydney metropolitan region, as you can see, rear end or nose to tail crashes do make up the large majority of fatal and serious injury crashes, which is why systems such as AEB will be extremely beneficial in bringing these numbers down. The reason why these systems must be mandatory is because there's no ANCAP star rating system for heavy vehicles as well. And safety systems are often seen as a cost if they're not in regulation. What is hidden in the data is those crashes that involve pedestrian fatalities though. And this is one crash type which I'll focus on in the following section. As you can see, pedestrians, like vulnerable road users, tend to be overrepresented in the fatality data in urban environments. And this is particularly evident in the Sydney metropolitan region over the last decade. And one of the contributing factors to such crash types involves the field of view offered to the driver. Field of view allows a driver to successfully anticipate traffic hazards and take action to prevent the risk of collision with other road users. It's offered by both indirect and direct visibility measures. Unfortunately, inadequate field of view is identified in several coronial findings in Australia, with repeat recommendations. As you can see in this image to the right, this was taken from a high-profile crash in Brisbane's South Bank in 2014, involving a cyclist, Rebecca Mayer, who was fatally struck after stationary at a set of traffic lights. The coronial inquest into her death, as you can see, found that a person 1.5 metres tall standing in front of the truck would be invisible to the driver if they were within 7 metres of the front of this vehicle. These are not localized accidents to Brisbane. If we refer to coronial data from Victoria alone, between 2000 and 2016, more than 50% of pedestrian fatalities with heavy vehicles had occurred where the heavy vehicle driver was unable to see the pedestrian before the collision. And of these fatalities, 22.5% involved the heavy vehicle crashing with an unobserved pedestrian where the vehicle was actually stationary before the crash. And unfortunately, crashes involving inadequate field of view have become a regular occurrence on our road network, and we continue to see the same factors contributing to more lives lost on our roads. This particular example in Sydney involved a heavy vehicle making a left turn into Albany Street and Crow's Nest, if you're familiar with the area, when it fatally struck an elderly couple crossing the road on a green pedestrian phase. Like this example shows that we are still not implementing the safe system. At this particular intersection, only layers of the system that we were relying on were people following the road rules. And these aren't random accidents, these are highly preventable. So I'd question the level of communication and sharing of lessons after these incidents occur. There's a lot that can be done in this space. I do have another question slide there, Jerome.
Excellent. I must admit, the point you made that they're all entirely preventable, yeah, it's one of the key things that resonate. The blind spots always make it hard. Question for you. When you touched back on the data, this is a question we had earlier, was around the vulnerable road users.
Yep.
Is it a bit of a different, do you know, is there any data or differentiation between trucks and dogs at all?
Truck and dogs. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get into that level of detail, but when the crash data that's collected, at least in New South Wales, I'm aware, the classification of a heavy rigid vehicle does include a truck and a dog trailer. So that's essentially a rigid vehicle carrying a trailer, whether that's a dog or a pig trailer. So that's the differentiation there. But I haven't been able to get to that level of detail. There is data, if you have a look at the New South Wales crash data online on the Centre for Road Safety's database, they do now publish by load carried. And when we were having a look at the data, the difference between 2019 and 2018, there was a significant increase in vehicles that were carrying a load, which was consistent with construction-related materials such as aggregates, gravel.
Okay. And you speak around some of these new technologies coming about. What sort of pace, how does Australia keep up with our heavy vehicles? Do we see, as the technology appears over in Europe? Because there's just a point here from raised by Len around direct vision, low entry vehicles. And it's a requirement for their organisation to have them to reduce the risk for vulnerable road users.
Right.
He mentioned that manufacturers in Australia seem to be reluctant to sort of promote them here.
Yeah, I will cover off that in the next slides, Jerome. Just obviously cognizant of time here.
Cool.
So, shall I progress?
Might as well.
Awesome. All right. So to address the particular blind spot issue that I was talking about and referring to in the previous slides, local schemes introduced to address this risk were observed in the urban centres reviewed in New York City and London. New York City's actually introduced crossover mirror legislation to address this particular risk. So what this does is essentially the mirror, as you can see highlighted there, provides visibility to the front and near side of a conventional vehicle's bonnet. New York City tracks their crash data as well as part of their Vision Zero program. They have seen since introduction of a number of these measures, not just mirrors, but also infrastructure changes as well. They've seen a 21.4% decrease in pedestrian fatalities in 2019 since rolling out this program. It's important to note that I don't believe that that's the same trend nationally though. So you can see that these effects are happening at a local level. Similarly, London's Safer Lorry scheme requires forward and blind spot mirrors and side under-on protection as well fitted to heavy vehicles that are exempt from the EU regulations. So what this means is that construction vehicles were actually exempt from these requirements in the EU regs for some reason. The benefit of these schemes is that they can address older vehicles that may be exempt from design rules and new vehicles as well. So I did mention side under-on protection. I will talk about that just really quickly. This is something that lacks in Australia quite a lot, speaking of vehicle safety systems. For those that don't know, side underarm protection is a passive safety system which is designed to reduce the risk of a vulnerable road user from being crushed or run over by the rear axle wheels of a heavy vehicle or trailer, particularly during a lane change or sideswipe maneuver. Still, there's no requirement in Australia for heavy vehicles to be fitted with these systems, which have been mandatory in the UK since 1986, and since introduction have contributed to a 61% decrease in cyclist fatalities and a 20% reduction in pedestrian fatalities from side impact crashes with heavy vehicles. As you can see the system there on that semi-trailer. An interesting fact, UK actually weren't the first country to mandate these systems. Japan actually introduced side rails into their regulations in 1979. And even more recently, Brazil mandated side underarm protection in 2009 with stricter strength requirements. There are other standards in the US, the US Department VOLPE standard, which was developed for a requirement by municipal vehicles and other local schemes, which are used in Boston and New York City. And in Australia, we have a technical advisory procedure, which was developed by the ATA, which is great. It reflects the UNEC Regulation 73. It's important to note that design standards can influence effectiveness of the system. Obviously, the impact strength, ground clearance, and whether it's a flat surface or bars or rails. This is highlighted by the European Transport Safety Council in 2017. Improved side underarm protection design is estimated to further reduce pedestrian and cyclist fatalities by 45%. As you can see, that the example there is a flat panel, and in London particularly, we're seeing a lot of messaging as well being put on side underarm protection, as well as even using them as billboards for promoting. And Len mentioned direct vision just then, so I will talk about this just quickly. So direct vision standard, some of the listeners might have read about this already. So I was fortunate enough to talk to Transport for London's unit that's rolling out this scheme, and also those that were involved in the research associated with direct vision. Essentially what it is a permit-based scheme, which is now introduced and will provide a star rating system based on heavy vehicle visibility. The scheme was developed by research from Loughborough University demonstrating that improved heavy vehicle direct vision reduced driver reaction times and distance traveled in a braking scenario when compared to traditional cab vehicles. And during my meetings with TfL, it was explained that the safety benefits associated with direct vision were quantified from research assessing reaction times to simulated external stimuli directly and indirectly, and comparing the difference between a traditional heavy vehicle and a low entry direct vision cab. As you can see here, the research quantified that driver reaction times responding to the external stimuli in direct vision cabs were approximately 0.7 seconds faster to responding to the same stimuli through indirect vision devices, i.e. mirrors or cameras. What this meant was in the context of traveling at, for example, 25 kilometers per hour, such as in a city, a built-up environment, after moving forward from a stationary position, drivers after detecting that stimuli through mirrors were found to travel an extra 5 meters before braking compared to detecting external stimuli directly through windows. This is important to note as well that in Australia, obviously our urban speed limits are a lot higher. So this reaction time and distance traveled will increase even further. Through improving reaction times, the research also found that driving a traditional cab compared to a low entry resulted in a 23% increase in pedestrian collisions. And when coupled with having to process a common cognitive distraction such as radio chatter, this resulted in a 40% increase in collisions. Feedback from TfL surveys and research also show that direct vision cabs do provide a lower stress environment as well for drivers in high traffic environments. And the European General Safety Regulation, which was recently reviewed as well, is now set to introduce direct vision improvements as a mandatory requirement for new vehicles as of 2025. Coupled with this, systems as well to detect vulnerable road users. These are active safety systems such as radar sensors. This is alongside other technologies which are also included as part of a suite of new vehicle safety technologies, which include intelligent speed assist, driver distraction and warning systems, and reversing detection systems, to name a few. It's estimated to save up to 553 lives a year in EU, and VRU detection systems are estimated to prevent up to 60% of all severe incidents. In Germany, they also rolled out a subsidy scheme as well to increase the uptake before introducing legislation. Example there, as you can see, you might have heard of as well, Mercedes-Benz provide this system called Side Guard Assist. So if we have a look at the regulations in Australia, under ADR 1402, which is our requirements for indirect vision for heavy vehicles, it still fails to require Class 6 mirrors for cab over engine heavy vehicles. And this is despite the EU mandating Class 6 mirrors since 2007. What this means is that we are still making new heavy vehicles that are coming off the production line that don't have the forward blind spot eliminated. Something as simple as a blind spot mirror could save a life. But in addition to that, our heavy vehicle standards national regulation is currently restricting the uptake of safer vehicles into our country. The regulations, many who are listening in, particularly those that work in the industry, would know that the vehicle standards regulation limits steer axle mass and has width restrictions as well. But when you have a look at it, the measurement of width of vehicles doesn't allow for a newer technology to exceed the 2.5 metre width for heavy vehicles in Australia. The new technology that I'm referring to is radar sensors, which are now mandatory in the EU for new vehicles as of 2022. So unfortunately, unless we change this regulation, we won't be able to see these systems introduced to vehicles that have or that need this exemption. Something that we could look to address this is the EU's regulation for type approval of masses and dimensions for new vehicles, which allows for the exemption of watching and detection aids, including radars, among other things, such as even pantographs on the top of vehicles, as there's a number of trials for electrification of heavy vehicles as well in Germany at the moment. I think as such technology becomes more available, it's vitally important that our regulations don't inhibit the adoption of new innovative systems designed to improve safety. The exemptions in the EU for this technology should be similarly included in our HVNL. And there are obviously ways that we can increase the uptake of these systems without resorting to regulation as well, or without, waiting for regulation to pass. This was seen in Transport for London's work-related road risk requirements. These are contractual requirements that not only require operators to comply with the existing schemes, but to produce a plan to demonstrate how they will introduce direct vision standard vehicles into their fleet. New York City's internal fleet replacement program as well is looking at replacing a lot of their municipal vehicles with direct vision standard vehicles. And Boston City Council's side guard ordinance as well. So anyone holding a contract with the Boston City Council must also improve the safety of their vehicle through indirect mirrors and side under-on protection for those vehicles. The other thing as well, which I came across as well, were the emission schemes. And a lot of the listeners might have heard of these as well. So the low emissions zone and ultra low emissions zone introduced in London last year are seeing improvements in the age of the fleet, which has an indirect benefit to safety. As you might know, Euro emission standards are a good indicator for vehicle age, which is a good indicator for vehicle safety. A survey that was done by Transport for London in 2018 found that 57% of the trucks that were surveyed in the Greater London area were actually Euro 6 compliant, and 21% were Euro 5. So you can see the vast majority are newer vehicles there. But there's also this New York City's Hunts Point Clean Trucks program as well, which is a government subsidy scheme, which basically provides a subsidy to businesses to invest in newer, cleaner vehicles, but also the conditions are that the vehicles must also have improved safety requirements, including visibility and under-run protection. So a number of recommendations can be made from there, which I've already mentioned, but we should really look to be updating our ADRs already for something as simple as a Class 6 mirror. We need to look at amending our HVNL and vehicle standards regulation. Obviously, that's under review now. Now is the best time to be doing that. And government procurement policies should require improved driver field of view through indirect vision devices and direct vision vehicles. And it's comforting to know that there are local jurisdictions out there that are doing this. But government procurement policy can also have a look at contracts as well that you engage in with as well, whether that's not just waste, but also building projects that are being awarded. It could also be included as a condition of granting PBS road access to local road environments. And we're seeing this with the SPECS scheme business rules in New South Wales, which only applies to construction vehicles, but is definitely a way that you can increase safety in the fleet. And also looking at subsidising fitting and retrofitting and proven technologies, as we're seeing in the US and UK. Underarm protection, as I mentioned before, these systems are all proven. And I think also, here's a research project for you, Jerome, a better understanding of blind spot issues in the Australian fleet. A lot of these studies were done in the EU, of the EU's fleet. But there are some unique differences to our fleet in Australia as we take trucks from Japan, from US and EU.
Sure. I think on that blind spot one, Michael, it's a really good point, because for those of you who haven't seen Hanson on our NRSP website, there's a great diagram illustrating how blind spots vary from vehicle to vehicle within their fleet. So I think that's a great sort of starting point to draw on. Have you seen much of that over in Europe at all, Michael?
Yeah, so blind spot mapping was something that the case study that I provided before of FM Conway, they blind spot mapped all of their truck fleet and provided that information to the drivers and included as part of the training package for them. Obviously, the blind spot mapping that was done for the direct vision standard, they did that for, I would say, nearly all the European manufactured trucks that are used in the UK. They were able to actually remodel the volume and visibility that was offered to the driver. And that involved a range of off-road, what they call M3G construction vehicles, which meet 0 stars in that direct vision standard, to on-road heavy vehicles, and then to direct vision low entry cabs.
How do you think our truck fleet would compare in regards to a low emission zone, should one of them materialise here?
I would say a low emission zone, introducing a low emission zone in Australia would be quite a challenge in our local jurisdictions, if I was to speak practically. It's obviously aspirational to do something like that, but does require some political will to do something like that. I think we do need to look at ways to replace some of the older vehicles in our fleet, at least. That example that I provided there of London, where more than 57% of the fleet are Euro 6. I don't know what the stats are in Australia. The Truck Industry Council would have that, but I would assume that it's quite low. There's obviously a lot of work to do there.
Should we move on to the final stretch?
Sure, yep. All right, so I think it's important to say that, vehicle safety technology, doesn't work on its own in a silo. It's important that, this is supported by drivers as well that are aware of their work and the limitations of the vehicle that they drive as well. So that brings me obviously to training and awareness. Again, I understand that a lot of the listeners are from the Chartered Institute of Logistics as well, who would be familiar with the driver CPC requirements in the EU. Whilst this is nothing new, I think it's important just for those listeners that aren't aware, the Driver Certificate of Professional Competence is a competency framework in the EU, which also includes the UK still. And what it requires is after heavy vehicle drivers obtain their license for the applicable class of heavy vehicle that they are to drive, they're also required to undertake what's called the CPC, or Certificate of Professional Competence. And what this involves is initially either 280 hours of training or sitting through a series of exams, which cover off on a broad range of topics from road safety to the regulatory framework, the EU social rules, etc. But then as a continuous professional development, they're required to do 35 hours every 5 years of continuous professional development training. I think this is important to note that the CPC was introduced, when I was talking to the European Transport Safety Council, they said that it was introduced to improve road safety of the driver and transport operations, but also to enhance the professional profile of commercial heavy vehicle operators to younger people and encourage and recruit new entrants into the EU's transport sector. Because like pretty much every country, they're also facing a driver shortage. More recently, though, this was happening when I was in the EU, they were amending the text, obviously in line with, current themes and issues. And the new EU CPC course will now explicitly require training in systems, a lot of the safety systems which I've just mentioned, which is very important that drivers, particularly now that we're seeing a lot of this new technology come through, understand how these systems work and the limitations of them, and not just to rely on them, because they are driver assistance systems, a lot of the active safety features. But this is included in the Driver Certificate of Professional Competence now as the latest amendment. And also to this particular relevance to the urban environment is the requirement now for driver training to include the following anticipation, assessment, and adapting to risks in traffic, including recognizing and adapting to dangerous situations, which may include interacting with vulnerable road users, such as cyclists, pedestrians, and powered two-wheelers. And a lot of this has come out because of the work that I would say Transport for London have recently done, and particularly with their courses called Safe Urban Driving, Work-Related Road Risk. And I had the opportunity to participate in these courses when I was in the UK, Safe Urban Driving, and a course called Epic Logistics as well. Safe Urban Driving essentially gives you the opportunity to do a practical ride as well and understand the road traffic environment from a vulnerable road user's perspective. The Epic Logistics course provides an immersive experience which involves reconstructing a chain of events that led up to a heavy vehicle crash, looking at factors such as fatigue, company pressures to get the job done, and using unsafe vehicles. Obviously, there's some parallels there with the chain of responsibility. And also the accreditation scheme that I mentioned at the start, FORS, has a number of online training programs as well, which are available free to its members. So you can see their Safe Urban Driving course. This is something that's being done in Melbourne at the moment, and my understanding is that this is progressing very well as well on the Melbourne Metro project. I think it's also important to mention as well, public awareness can be a powerful tool to educate and change behaviours long term. And this is being demonstrated through a number of campaigns which give industry the opportunity to show the public what it's like to operate a heavy vehicle from their point of view. And certainly we do this quite well in Australia as well with our Be Truck Aware, We Need Space to Keep You Safe, and the ATA's Safety 360 program as well. But a number of the schemes as well, which I was able to compare and pick any of the gems from as well, are featured here. I think what's great as well is that a lot of companies as well doing these exchanging places events where they do get the public to experience what it's like to sit in the cab of a truck and experience those blind spots. The last topic which I will cover off just quickly is this concept of sustainable urban logistics. This is increasingly being promoted and used in the UK and the EU, more so from a sustainability and a congestion issue to address, but the benefits also flow onto road safety. When I was in the UK, TfL took me through a number of delivery toolkits and also their construction logistics program, both of which are designed to provide tools to businesses as well that operate in the transport logistics sector to look at planning their routes for heavy vehicles that they use. So looking at selecting safer routes, avoiding sensitive areas, retiming their deliveries as well outside of peak hours, and reducing their freight movements through methods such as consolidation or utilizing alternative transport modes. Certainly, the concept of consolidation is done well in other sectors, but in construction, not so much. An example that I found when I was in the EU, the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology actually found that 65% of heavy vehicle trips could be reduced by simply consolidating the freight at a laydown area outside an urban environment. But vehicles could also be optimized as well, reducing the number of movements and vehicles on the road. There are a number of recommendations that can be made there as well, which we could look at trialing in Australia, ranging from route planning to consolidating our materials for construction projects. I think that brings me to the end of my presentation, Jerome. I just do want to finish on a quote that I received from a lady that I met when I was in the UK, Cynthia Barlow. She's the chair of Road Peace UK. Her daughter was tragically killed while cycling in London from a heavy vehicle crash, but she's worked tirelessly with industry to improve their standards. I feel what she said to me really sums up my fellowship. She said, higher operating standards, better route planning, driver training appropriate for the urban environment, new direct vision vehicle cab designs, new types of safety technology are all available now. We can prevent the needless deaths of hundreds of people on our roads every year. Why isn't that our priority?
Awesome.
Thank you.
I'll let this just run for a little bit over because we lost that middle time. So I do apologize for that again, the joys of technology in the COVID situation. So please shoot through your questions. And just a point I'd like to say, NRSP delivers with Amy Gillett Foundation, the Safe Urban Driving in Melbourne, and seeing the truck drivers get on the bikes and actually going through the program is quite fascinating. They come back in after the bike ride and the pennies dropped. They sort of recognize that it's a shared responsibility. Everyone's out there. I've seen some fascinating outcomes from delivering those courses. Question for you. With regards to the safe urban driving, the complexities, how are you seeing it applied continuously through the projects in New South Wales, the major ones, or is each project sort of taking their own sort of approach?
Safe urban driving in New South Wales?
Yeah, just in New South Wales, in your sort of area.
Yeah, so I'm not aware of safe urban driving being rolled out in New South Wales. I'm aware of, the project that I work on, Sydney Metro, we have a course which is safe heavy vehicle driver introduction, which discusses low risk driving techniques, hazard awareness, and sharing the road safely with vulnerable road users. But it doesn't have an on-road practical element, which safe urban driving does.
Okay, great.
I'd love to if I had some funding.
Have we any other questions from the audience? We've got one from here. How does the NHVAS sort of compare, and NHV Heavy Vehicle Act sort of compare to UK and European practice and regulations, do you think?
I'll be careful. So
I wouldn't expect anything else.
So the NHVAS scheme has been around for a long time, and unfortunately hasn't improved much over the time that it's been there. It's very compliance focused. For those of you that don't know, NHVAS is a modular scheme which has accreditation against maintenance, mass or fatigue management, AFM or BFM. It's modular, so you select and choose what you want to be accredited against. But when you look at that, it only really addresses three different aspects of the HVNL when there are a plethora of aspects that relate to safer road transport and logistics. Not just the HVNL, there's a lot more involved in that as well. So yeah, the NHVAS does require a bit of a review. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that's under review at the moment anyway, as part of the HVNL review.
And we'll take this final question. And I've actually had quite a few chats and comments come in saying, awesome presentation, Michael. So thank you very much. Len here just says, look, he tends to feel that Australian dealers don't really push the safety benefits of urban specific trucks with legislation. Yeah. What can we do to make this progress more quickly, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I have seen that as well with Australian manufacturers. My understanding is that only recently Mack Trucks and Volvo have been promoting visibility to the driver, blind spot mirrors, and side underarm protection. But yeah, I think there's a lot more that can be done in that space. You know, it's as simple as putting it on the website, or just including it, you know, in a brochure or something like that, because the systems are available and made. It's not like they don't exist. So I think what can be done to improve that, well, obviously, I think, you know, we as industry and even, you know, government as well can do a bit more engagement with vehicle manufacturers around this, you know, just to provide a little bit more consumer information, I guess. But also, you know, specifying, as I mentioned before, such as the FORS scheme or Transport for London's work-related road risk requirements, specifying vehicle safety measures as well. Melbourne Metro and the Sydney Metro project are specifying really simple vehicle safety features as well as, you know, requirements for training. So it's not all that abstract or different to what we already do. We specify requirements for work health and safety, environmental management. We can be specifying road safety as well if we take road safety seriously.
Great. It's a great answer. We'll be releasing a case study soon on Grasshopper Environmental, I think, which is a great example touching on that technology. So we have a couple other questions, but we'll hold them over because we've run out of time, and I'll pass them on to you, Michael, see if you can sort of close them out personally, if that's all right.
Yep, sure.
So thank you very much. If you can just go to the next slide, please, Michael. Thank you very much. You can please register. There's my contact details if you need to reach out for me. Reach for the newsletter, social media, and we'll make sure this is up online, and the PowerPoint will be available as well. So thank you very much to our audience. And Michael, that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Jerome. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Have a great day.